Ravens wide receiver Zay Flowers was the biggest Dynasty winner on Sunday. We will explain why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Behind the Steel Curtain, Pro Football Focus, and Yahoo. On today's show, we're going to be talking about three of the biggest winners, maybe winners, from championship round on Sunday. And I want to start with Zay Flowers, Kate, because I thought he was the biggest winner. 115 yards in the receiving game. Scored a touchdown, had a couple carries in this game, should have had 2 touchdowns. The reason why I think he's a winner is because the real life implications from this game are probably going to hurt his value across the league, right? Because he fumbled the ball into the end zone, which could have kept this game to a 3-point game. He had a taunting call that cost Baltimore 15 yards. In terms of a real life impact, it was not as great as his dynasty impact. But I thought he was really, really good whenever the Ravens needed him.
I do think you bring up an interesting point. So obviously you look at the box score, you're going to be happy with that stat line all day long. But the vibes of what Zay Flowers did, you mentioned the taunting call, the fumble out of the end zone, they were absolutely big time, huge, mega costly mistakes. Are they big time costly mistakes that are actually going to impact his standing with this franchise long term after being drafted as a first round receiver and doing so many things right in that game? Obviously, it's a bit more nuanced than that. But no, like this game is not going to have an impact on his long-term value with the franchise. It's just going to leave a sour taste in your mouth about what could have been. And that's probably a great way to capitalize on some of those negative vibes that are kind of floating around. And I think we saw a lot of consistency throughout Zay Flowers, especially in the second half of the season, that doesn't speak to some of these kind of costly mistakes that felt like, yeah, those are things that a rookie might do on a big stage that maybe he just wasn't fully prepared for just yet.
Yeah, and we care about the production, right? Not necessarily. I mean, the fumble obviously hurts because it takes away a touchdown. You lose points because of the fumble. I mean, we don't need to go over all that, but in terms of how he performed statistically, he was really good in this game. And you look at the other receivers, Kate, from the Ravens in this one, Nelson Aguilar, 1 catch for 39 yards. He had a big drop on a third down. Odell Beckham did not have a target in the first half. Finished the game 3 catches for 22 yards. He is scheduled to be a free agent. Isaiah Likely 2 for 16. Mark Andrews 2 for 15. Like, it's just so clear that Zay Flowers is the best weapon on this offense outside of Lamar Jackson. And he's doing it as a rookie, right? So to perform that well, albeit, and I know about the fumble, in that big of a stage, it just gives me so much more confidence going into 2024 that he's primed to have a huge season. And I think, we've debated Zay Flowers' dynasty value over the last couple of weeks. You and I both prefer Rashee Rice long-term. Go listen to our show on Friday if you want to hear our reasons why. But I feel really good coming out of that game about Zay Flowers' long-term prospects.
Yeah, especially seeing him on the field with Mark Andrews, obviously coming off a big injury. I think we saw a reduced role for him overall, but seeing him kind of take over that game with Isaiah Likely, with the number of playmakers on the field. Now, I do have to ask this on the back of your Zay Flowers take, because also leaving a sour taste in people's mouths is probably quarterback Lamar Jackson, who in the most recent Dynasty batch of ADP, quarterback 5, just ahead of Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Anthony Richardson. Uh, what do you think this game was this kind of a ding for Lamar Jackson in terms of his dynasty value? Could he be a potential buy after this? Because again, one of those situations where you look at Lamar Jackson, his fantasy value, obviously not his best game as a passer, kind of limited himself in the run a little bit. And you obviously saw sparks there, but it wasn't a complete game from Lamar Jackson the way that we have been accustomed to seeing, especially at the end of this year. Could this be a time to buy? Because
Absolutely.
again,
Yes.
the postseason narratives, the questions about whether or not, obviously he's locked into a contract with the Baltimore Ravens. He just played out the first year of his new deal. He's going to be there a while. Whether or not people think he has the chops for the postseason, that's irrelevant at this point. If there are some folks that are cooling on Lamar Jackson after that kind of disappointing run, I'd be in on buying Lamar Jackson as well.
Oh yeah, all in. Because even in a bad Lamar Jackson game, 326 yards, including the 54 on the ground. He did throw one touchdown to Zay Flowers. Should have had two, right? So if I'm telling you against what's the number 2 ranked defense in the NFL, in Kansas City Chiefs, he has 320 yards and 2 touchdowns. You'll take that all day. And I think I'm going to mention this again. Zay Flowers is a rookie, and that was his best receiver. Mark Andrews coming off of the injury. It was clear he wasn't 100%. I've got to assume that Baltimore is going to go out and try to get more receivers this offseason. They had a bunch of running back injuries all year between J.K. Dobbins getting hurt in week 1. Keaton Mitchell got hurt, at the later parts of the year. I think the Ravens are going to continue to surround Lamar Jackson with a bunch of weapons. And he's like 26, 27 years old. And we know what Lamar Jackson does in the regular season, Kate. He puts up ridiculous numbers. So of course, yeah, I'm buying Lamar Jackson. There's nothing from this game that would make me worried about his dynasty value at all. Nothing.
Yeah, and this might be one of those circumstances where you capitalize on some of these down games on a really big stage because they do. Like as much as we never want to be reactionary.
We mean down, not fantasy value, but down like
Yes.
nationally, like an actual on the field game because they didn't win at home. Sorry,
Yes,
just
correct.
didn't mean to
So
cut you off.
yeah, no. I think that's exactly the point I want to make. There are these moments where you can kind of capitalize on these national narratives that aren't the most positive, but guess what? They have nothing to do with these players' value on the field. So
Nope.
sometimes listening to that talk and that conjecture like that can play into some buy low opportunities for your dynasty teams.
Absolutely, because all the talk this this offseason, and it sucks, is going to be, well, Lamar Jackson's not good enough to win the playoffs and all that. And that shouldn't impact his fantasy value and his dynasty value because we care about the regular season. And there's very few quarterbacks in the regular season that are more dynamic, more consistent, more productive than Lamar Jackson. So, yeah, I think coming out of this game, he's an absolute buy. I want to talk, Kate, about Travis Kelce because we saw his ADP really drop in the month of January. We discussed that on one of the shows last week. Go check out our tight end ADP. I want to go in a little further with Travis Kelce after another huge game. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you have to do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is the most fun that I've had playing DFS because there's so many different players and stat projections to choose from. Plus, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We wanted to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Okay, let's talk about Travis Kelce because the regular season was not his best. He missed some time with an injury. A lot of weeks at the end of the season that were pretty rough. In the playoffs, he's just continues to turn it on against the Ravens. 11 targets, 11 catches, 116 yards, and a touchdown. Did we overrate a meh season from Travis Kelce this year?
I'm still out on Travis Kelce and Dynasty. And this might be like one of my hottest takes yet, Marcus. And we talked a bit about Travis Kelce, as you mentioned, on our Dynasty ADP show just last week. So if you missed that, go back, listen to the tight end episode. Travis Kelce, on average, drafted as the tight end 8. Now that's behind names like TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, George Kittle. Obviously George Kittle a little bit closer there in the age column, but Travis Kelce, 34 years old. I think my question comes, if he wins the Super Bowl, I know there's been conjecture about will he retire, will he not retire? He looks very healthy right now. So I think maybe we're not going to see that retirement announcement on the back of, one of his healthier looking runs here. He is a beast in the postseason, but we've also seen him coming off a couple of weeks of rest, he's not going to be coming off a couple of weeks of rest here in the regular season moving forward. I still have this concern that regular season Travis Kelce without a couple of weeks off may not be where it's at 34 years old, because it is a long football season, Marcus. And we saw as Travis Kelce continued to get dinged up throughout this year without a pattern of rest here, he didn't look to be the same football player. Now, again, he does look healthy right now, but with the caveat that he had a couple of weeks off. And I think that can obviously do wonders for the body. Can Travis Kelce do it for another season? Because, you have to admit, we're running out of time.
Do you think he comes back next year?
I think if they win the Super Bowl, there's a legitimate chance that he doesn't. And that's not based on any sort of inside information, but more or less based on the fact that I think he's going to want to go out on top. B, I think this seems to be the most banged up season he's had to this point. And you're getting older. Your priorities are shifting. This is just me totally spitballing here. But I think the point stands regardless of whether or not he decides to come back next year. He's going to be 35 years old, Marcus. 35.
I know. I think the point that you made that I really agree with is just they aren't going to overwork him in the regular season if he comes back next year, because look at the way this season played out. They ended up being the 3 seed in the AFC, and it didn't really matter, right? They still got to the Super Bowl as a 3 seed. They didn't give him a million targets. They tried to make sure by the end of the season he was healthy. And that's ultimately what matters. And I think Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are going to look at this situation and be like, okay, we've got Rashee Rice. We're probably going to draft a receiver, sign him. We're still going to use Travis Kelce. He's going to get his 7 to 8 targets a game, but we don't need him to carry the offense anymore. He doesn't need to be the number 1 receiver on this offense. So let's get him involved, but not overwork him so we can have him in stride when he gets to the postseason. And that's just going to be a big knock on his dynasty value, because what we've become accustomed to seeing with Travis Kelce is when he's out on the field, he's basically a number 1 receiver that you can play as a tight end. I just don't think that's going to be the case, especially as he gets into his age 35 and 36 season. I thought he looked great on Sunday. This is the best he's played all year, but I'm not sure that it's going to translate into dynasty value moving forward in the regular season. And that's why I would still be a little bit hesitant to buy him.
Yeah, I think that this game kind of just showed you probably, or maybe it's like a proof of concept sort of thing where you need him healthy for the postseason and you see what a difference he can make down the line. But like you said, they didn't overutilize him, like they didn't have him at his best in the second half of the season. And they still made an incredible, second half run. They finished as the number 3 seed. Obviously, you're looking for the number 1 seed, but it didn't matter. So, yeah, if they can take a little bit off of his plate moving forward, if they can get other receivers involved, whether that be via the draft, trade, free
Mm-hmm.
agency, like I think they're going to need to get some extra help, especially on the outside here. But I just don't see a world where you're going to see Travis Kelce returning all that value that we probably expected for him heading into the season with the age, with the way we saw this year play out. And I don't think tight end 8 is a bad value. If you're a team in a win now position,
Sure, sure.
there might not be maybe a safer option than Travis Kelce. You look at his first half of the season, Marcus, and this is when he was just coming off of some of those injuries. I mean, I think 7 top 5 finishes here through the first 12 weeks of the season. He got you to the playoffs. He just didn't perform once we got into the trenches of the year. So definitely depending on your situation, but if you're looking at this and you're like, I'm in a rebuild situation, or I'm leaning in the direction of a rebuild, I need to get a little bit younger. I do think this is the moment where you capitalize on the excellence that we've seen in the playoffs here from
Mm-hmm.
Travis Kelce. You take advantage of just how healthy he's looked coming off of 2 weeks of rest, and you call it a day.
I just want to mention really quickly, we talked about Isaiah Pacheco on Friday's show and how this was a really big game for him in his dynasty value. Uh, the numbers weren't great. He had, I think it was 82 total yards, did score a touchdown. I think the thing that was the most encouraging for me, Kate, 28 touches in this game. The only other running back to get a touch in the run game was Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 1 carry for 1 yard. Clyde also got 2 receptions for 3 yards. Like, this is his backfield, and the Chiefs trust him so much. I think even though the fantasy production wasn't elite in this game, they were going against the number 1 defense on the road. I feel even better about Isaiah Pacheco moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Obviously, I think everybody's going to have hesitancy regarding the draft capital and that that potential that he's going to lose out on his job, but there's nothing that you've seen from him on the field, I think, that indicates to this point that should be a concern. And the fact that they lean on him so heavily, not just in the touch total column, but the percentage of running back touches that he
Mhm.
saw, which was just about 98% here. That is ultimately the most encouraging thing that you can ask for
Absolutely.
with Pacheco's value.
All right, let's talk about Brock Purdy, because he was another player that we highlighted on Friday's show as somebody who really needed to have a big game to kind of maintain his dynasty value. Let's discuss Purdy and what he did against the Lions next. This next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need that opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let those out, especially to someone who is unbiased on your life. So today I want to tell you how I'm really feeling about something. You might even be thinking the same thing this week. I'm not excited for a Chiefs 49ers Super Bowl. I get that these are probably the 2 best teams in the NFL. I just like Super Bowls where we have a clear underdog. That's not the case here. You're either rooting for Patrick Mahomes to win his 3rd Super Bowl or this loaded 49ers team to finally get it done. I'm just not all that excited, but there you go. Now I feel better. Therapy can be different for everyone. Maybe sometimes just getting something off of your chest, like your favorite sports team or how much you don't like the 49ers. It can be really helpful. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, just want to let you know that Matt Williamson back on Wednesday to answer your Twitter questions, so make sure you send them in to us. We've also got the Senior Bowl coming up this week, so we're going to have shows later in the week kind of discussing some of the biggest winners and losers from the Senior Bowl, so make sure you check that out as well. But Kate, I want to talk about Brock Purdy, who, I mean, depending on who you listen to, had a Joe Montana-like game. Some people thought he really struggled. So what is your opinion on Brock Purdy coming out of the NFC Championship game?
I'm going to say, so coming into this game, we obviously talked about how this could be a monumental game for his dynasty value. And coming out of this game, now I'm looking at the Super Bowl and I'm saying the Super Bowl is going to have a very big impact on his dynasty value. Now, the box score from Brock Purdy, not a terrible game. And I will say, I do think the stats are just a little bit skewed because he had some plays that went his way. And obviously, you can't predict on a weekly basis how that's actually going to play out. Like the deep pass to Brandon Ayuk that bounced off the helmet, and Brandon Ayuk happened. Like it was an absolutely insane play, Marcus. And you cannot count on those kind of plays to fall your way because technically Brock Purdy basically threw an interception, right? It didn't count towards an interception in the stats column, but he threw an interception.
That's why our great friends at PFF call those turnover-worthy plays, right? When you throw a pass, it should be intercepted, but it's not.
And Brock Purdy actually had 3 turnover-worthy plays. It's actually interesting. Lamar Jackson, we're talking about what a terrible game he had. He also had 3 turnover-worthy plays here in the passing game. We're not talking about Lamar Jackson, or we're not talking about Brock Purdy as the bad passer. Now, from a stats perspective, it's kind of interesting. He had a good chunk of his passes going through the air. Like it wasn't a yards after the catch game for Brock Purdy. It was an air yards game. 58.4% of his passing yards came through the air, which that's one of the highest marks we've seen from him in a single game all season long. But again, you look at, some of those plays and where those yards resulted from. A lot of them came on that big pass to Brandon Ayuk that should have been intercepted. I just think from an eyeball perspective, this game wasn't as clean from Brock Purdy as the stats would indicate. And if I'm Kyle Shanahan and I don't walk away from this year with a Super Bowl ring, again, we've talked about his wandering eye. I don't necessarily know that what we've seen from Brock Purdy in this game is going to endear him to Kyle Shanahan. Maybe I'm being overreactive here. I just think he has a short leash, and it makes me nervous.
I agree, and especially when you look at if you look at his last 4 games, right? So let's go back to Christmas, right? He had the 4 interception game against the Ravens where they lost. They got killed, right? Played poorly. Played really well against Washington the next week. Awesome. Great. Against the Packers, he had 3 turnover-worthy throws in that game. Again, did not play very well in that game. It did have the nice comeback at the end, but didn't play great. And then against the Lions, again, another 3 passes that were turnover worthy. Had the one big play to Ayuk that should have been an interception. He's gotten very fortunate against 2 pretty bad defenses in the Packers and the Lions the last couple of weeks. Like those are not great defenses, and you're playing both of those games at home. The Lions were, I think, the 23rd ranked defense in points per game. The Packers were even worse than that. I want to see what he looks like in a big stage against the Chiefs. If he really struggles in that game and the 49ers lose, I do think there could be a potential for the 49ers to look to replace him, or maybe to not give him a huge deal when he's eligible for one after the 2024 season. So I know the national narrative is that he's a superstar and that he's playing great. I got a feeling that Kyle Shanahan is a little bit more level-headed than that.
Yeah, and that's, again, not to say what Brock Purdy is doing right now isn't absolutely incredible. But, I mean, dating back to week 16, that game against the Ravens where he threw 4 picks. Like, he hasn't looked spectacular, right? And again, going up against the Commanders defense, 230 yards, 2 touchdowns, great. You would expect that against the Commanders defense, who don't even have a defense. Like, you're going to expect that. But yeah, the Packers and the Lions, obviously they're teams to be dealt with, but susceptible secondaries that you would think he should carve up a little bit more than he did with the weapons that he has. Now, if some plays didn't fall his way,
it's a weird game. That's why it's really important to watch some of these games, because man, that could have been a historically bad collapse for Brock Purdy if Vildor catches that pass, or if Cam Sutton in the first quarter, he throws just a duck to Cam Sutton, who drops it. It was a poor performance. I want to see how he can respond. Does he bounce back against this Chiefs defense that just made Lamar Jackson look pretty rough in Baltimore in the championship round? That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out the show on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Kate does fantastic work with the shorts. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I am at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.